Welcome everyone to today's webinar, and we are indeed going to cover 7 steps to faster Salesforce deployments. Ultimately, what we want to do is have faster, smoother, error-free deployments on the platform, and hopefully some of these tips are going to get you there. So, as Amy has confirmed, I am indeed Rob Cowell, one of the DevOps advocates here at Gearset. So my mission is to help Salesforce professionals like you have an easier life when it comes to deploying and releasing your changes. And hopefully by sharing some of the tips and techniques of DevOps, we can get you there. So let's get started with some of those tips for faster deployments. So launching into the Salesforce world is kind of a big deal for any business. It's not just about getting a new tool, it's about making that tool work for what you need. So the idea of a structured approach is like having a good recipe before you start cooking. It helps everyone know what needs to be done, how it's done, and what we want to achieve at the end of the day. A structured game plan will help spot any road bumps before they turn into mountains. So with a clear plan, everyone can work together better, and we can fix issues before they become big headaches. It's about keeping things running smoothly and getting the most out of Salesforce. And so it doesn't just end with setting it up right. It's also about keeping that momentum going. Following a solid plan from the start helps not only make the initial setup a success, but it helps keep the good times rolling as we roll Salesforce out down the road. So as we go through today's session, we'll break down into 7 simple steps to make streamlining Salesforce a breeze and ensure that it does exactly what it needs to do for your business. So the first step for any efficient process, DevOps or otherwise, begins with thorough planning and preparation. So we can further break this down by applying that planning to each step along your entire development lifecycle. So kicking off our Salesforce journey begins with the discovery phase, which is all about mapping out the territory. It's here that we dig into what our users need and decide on what we'll build in order to meet those needs. Then we step into version control. Now, think of this as marking our trail on the map so that we can always trace back our steps. It's a crucial part for knowing who did what and when, and it sets us up for success in a number of ways that change sets alone can't deliver. We're going to explore version control a little more when we look at ways to track changes efficiently, whether they're declarative and config changes or code changes. Now onto the development phase, where we actually start the journey, trekking through that coding terrain or building new pathways, or even improving the existing ones in our Salesforce environment. The testing phase is our checkpoint. It's where we ensure that the pathways we've created are safe and lead to where they're supposed to. And this journey includes user acceptance testing, where our users get to walk the paths and give us the green light on feedback of any roadblocks they might encounter. Lastly, we reach the product release, our destination, and it's where we open up those new trails to all our users, ensuring they have a smooth journey ahead in the Salesforce environment. So this step-by-step approach, this roadmap, ensures that we're all well prepared and equipped for that journey, making sure that what we deliver aligns with the needs and expectations of our users. Every phase is a crucial part of that map. Miss one, and we might find ourselves a little off course. So the next step is the use of sandboxes. Sandboxes in Salesforce are special areas where you can test and develop things safely away from your live environment. And of course, there are different types of sandboxes, each serving a unique purpose. The developer sandbox is a lightweight sandbox used mainly for coding and configuration and testing by individual developers and admins. It's like a personal workspace, but with limited data storage. The Developer Pro sandbox is a bit larger than the Developer Sandbox. It offers more space for data, and it's used for similar purposes, coding, configuration, building and testing, but with a little bit more room to work with. The Partial Copy sandbox is more substantial still. It carries a chunk of your live data for more accurate testing and development, and it's useful to see how your new changes will interact with existing data. And finally, we have the Full Copy sandbox. And as the name suggests, this one's a full copy of your live environment. It can be used for performance testing, user acceptance testing, and training. And it's ideal when you need to test those changes in a full replica of your live setup. Now, before you refresh any sandbox, it's smart to have a list of the configurations and settings that you'll need to update afterwards. It's like having a checklist for everything that needs to be reset. When it's time to refresh, you should choose a time that causes the least hassle. Since refreshing takes a little time, it's also good to pick a window for when that sandbox is least needed. After the refresh, you can go through the checklist and update the necessary configurations, re-establish any needed connections, and ensure that the sandbox is ready for use again. And lastly, communication is key to everything we do. Make sure that everyone who uses the sandbox knows when the refresh is happening and what they need to do before and after. So keeping everyone informed will help ensure that the sandbox is ready for testing and development once that refresh is complete. Next, we look at the issue of handling missing dependencies. Dealing with missing dependencies in a Salesforce deployment is about tackling those unseen links that could throw a wrench in our deployment process. There's references to objects, fields, or other bits of code or setup that don't necessarily exist in the environment that we're moving to. The first step in that process is all about identification. There's tools out there like Salesforce's Dependency API, or even some third-party solutions that can help us spot these missing links. And it's crucial to get a good grasp on what's missing before we dive into fixing things. Once we have figured out what's missing, we can move on to resolution. Now, this could mean creating those missing objects or fields in the new environment, or tweaking the code or the setup to get rid of or replace those missing references. But the aim here is to smoothen out the bumps so that everything interacts well. After we've tackled those missing pieces, it's time for a little verification. We need to check and double check that we've addressed all those dependencies and that our deployment is now ready to roll as planned. So running some tests and reviewing the setups are crucial steps here to make sure that we've got everything in place. It's a good practice to jot down the dependencies that we found, how we resolved them, and any changes that we needed to make along the way, because this documentation can be a lifesaver for future deployments, makes things a lot easier. And lastly, once again, we shouldn't forget about communication. It's important that we keep our team in the loop about the missing dependencies and how we resolve them, because when everyone's on the same page, it helps avoid confusion and it paves the way for a smoother deployment process. Now, we talked about testing when we were looking at those dependencies, and we need to look at testing in a little more detail. Testing is our way of making sure that what we've built not only works as intended, but performs well under different conditions and is something that our users will find useful and easy to use. So let's kick things off with automated testing. Automated testing is like having a little robot buddy who checks your work. It's all about running those pre-designed tests automatically to catch any bugs or issues early on. This way, we can fix the problems as soon as they pop up, saving time and ensuring a higher level of quality in what we deliver. Next on the list is performance testing. Performance testing is where we check how our setup holds up under pressure. It's like seeing how your car performs on a rough dirt track. We test how the system behaves under heavy load and how fast it responds to requests. The aim here is to ensure that what we've built and what we've set up won't crumble when things get busy. And then we move on to user acceptance testing, or UAT. And this is where we invite our users to give the setup a spin. It's about getting feedback from the people that actually use the system daily. They help us see if what we've built meets their needs and is easy to use. Their thumbs up is crucial because at the end of the day, it's all about delivering something that's useful and user-friendly to them, not just to us. And testing isn't just a box that needs to be ticked as part of your deployments. It's a crucial step that makes sure that our Salesforce deployment is ready to face the real world. So through thorough testing, we ensure that what we deliver is reliable, robust, and ready to meet those needs. So let's now delve into the vital aspects of tracking and keeping our Salesforce setups in sync, which is all about having a good system to manage and monitor the changes that we make along the way. Now, this includes version control on the technical side of things, but also includes change and release management on the process side of things. So let's start with that version control, which you sometimes might hear referred to as source control as well. Version control is our way of keeping a good history of all the changes that we make, whether that's code, flow, field changes, pretty much everything that's metadata in our org. Every time we make a change, it can be logged. So if something does go wrong, or even if we just need to look back at something that was done a while back, we have a clear record. It's our safety net. It ensures that no matter what happens, we can always trace back our steps. And since that metadata encompasses objects, fields, declarative logic, and code, and all of that metadata can be treated as a file, it means that version control of these files is valuable to admins and developers alike. So let's look at the other side of the coin, the less technical side, which is change and release management. This is where we plan, schedule, and control the process of building and delivering those changes. It's about having a good plan on how and when we roll out those changes. It ensures everyone's prepared and everything goes smoothly. We decide what changes are going to be made, when they'll be made, and how they'll be deployed. So it's having a clear roadmap from building all the way through to deploying those changes. And this means being organized, having a clear view of the changes, and ensuring everything rolls out smoothly and consistency across the board. So through this meticulous tracking and management, we ensure that our Salesforce setups are well organized, synchronized, and ready for deployment. An effective change and release management process highlights how it's not just those technical elements that can speed up your deployments. A well-structured process will minimize errors, streamlining the transition of changes from development to production, and overall enhance efficiency. A clear release schedule will improve resource allocation. With known release times, teams can plan better, and that accelerates deployments too. And it also ensures timely checks, which reduces last-minute hurdles that could delay your deployment. And once again, communication comes to the fore. Good change and release management will improve that team communication, because a clear understanding of what changes are being made and when will eliminate confusion and promote a faster deployment process. But the speed of deployments is nothing if those deployments aren't reliably successful most of the time. Retreads and rework swallow up resources that are better spent delivering new value. So to solve this, we need to have greater visibility into our deployments. Equally, we should be mindful that the successful delivery of projects is more than just those technical considerations. We should always work to keep stakeholders in the loop on the progress of work from development through to delivery. And that's the key to a smoother release cycle, providing visibility throughout that entire process. Visibility is the lens through which we monitor deployments and understand our feedback. It's about having a clear view of what's happening during the deployment and how it's performing afterwards. This clear view enables better monitoring, helps spot issues in real time, and it also helps understand the feedback better as we get a clear picture of what was deployed and how it's performing. Monitoring deployments is about having real-time insights as those changes roll out, spotting any issues early, and it allows for quick action if things aren't going to plan. Now, when we talk about monitoring, we're going beyond just watching that deployment circle in the Salesforce UI, or looking out for the famous deployment fish that some of you more seasoned professionals will know so well. Instead, what we're talking about is monitoring the health of our changes from start to finish. We test early and often, looking for errors and anomalies, by using techniques such as automated test runs or static code analysis that will help us spot potential issues early. We integrate our changes together with those of our peers on a regular basis, and that ensures that everything sits together without unintended consequences. We perform pre-deployment validations ahead of that release to simulate the full experience and check that all is well. All of these steps contribute to monitoring our release end to end and hopefully avoid any nasty surprises. Now, on the other hand, gathering and acting on feedback from our testing is about understanding that user experience post-deployment. Feedback helps in identifying areas for improvement and ensures that the setup meets the user's needs and performs well. So we move on to training and documentation. And training is key to optimizing your deployments. Regular training sessions keep your Salesforce team updated on the latest DevOps methodologies and tools, and it ensures efficient and effective deployments. On the other hand, creating comprehensive documentation is about having a solid reference guide for your teams. It aids in understanding and implementing those DevOps practices in your Salesforce deployments, and it makes the process smoother still. So this right combination of training and documentation for your internal Salesforce teams is crucial for enhancing that deployment efficiency, but it also promotes a culture of knowledge sharing and continuous learning within those Salesforce teams. And this foundation will again contribute to successful deployments, which are rooted in best practices and collaborative effort. So let's have a wrap up of those 7 actions that we can take to improve the speed of our deployment. We began with preparation and planning, where we outlined our goals and planned the deployment, and it set the groundwork for the steps that followed. Next, we looked at using sandboxes for testing and development. This step ensures that we have a safe environment to test and refine those configurations before we move them up to the live setup. Handling missing dependencies followed next, focusing on identifying and resolving those dependencies to ensure a smooth deployment process. Testing was the next step, ensuring that our configurations were robust and ready for real-world use through automated testing, performance testing, and user acceptance testing. We then looked at tracking and keeping our orgs in sync, which emphasizes the importance of version control on the technical side and a good change and release management process on the operational side to ensure a well-coordinated deployment. Visibility came next, focusing on monitoring deployments and gathering actionable feedback for continuous improvement. And lastly, we discussed the need for training and documentation for our Salesforce teams. So here we're talking about documentation and training on our development and deployment process, not necessarily the training and documentation for our end users. Both equally important, but these will allow our Salesforce teams to work on those DevOps processes and best practices and fold them into their daily working. Now, adopting each of these steps is crucial for a successful Salesforce deployment. It's about being structured, informed, and proactive in your approach. And it ensures that not only do we have successful deployments, but also that culture of continuous improvement and excellence in our deployment processes. Now, while none of the approaches that I've discussed today are unique to any particular solution or platform, of course, I'm going to encourage you to see how easy it could be working with Gearset for your deployments. And when we talked about visibility, monitoring deployments, keeping your orgs in sync and managing all those dependencies, these are all things that are possible within Gearset so that you have this central place, this central user interface and dashboard to manage your deployments. If you're not already using Gearset, we do have a 30-day free trial that has all of those features enabled, and you can get started on that via our website, or you can scan the QR code that I've got on the screen here. You don't need to install anything into your org, and even during that free trial period, you still have full access to our world-class support team. You get the same level of support during that trial as you would from a paying customer. So that covers everything that I was wanting to share with you today in the main presentation. But of course, we're always happy to pick up any questions that you might have. So with that in mind, I will hand back over to Amy to see what questions we've got come up from everybody on the call.
Thanks so much, Rob. That was fantastic. Some really practical advice there for people to take away. And yeah, just to reiterate, if we don't get round to answering your question today, do feel free to reach out to us on our live chat via our website, gearset.com, and we can answer any of your questions over there as well. But we do have time at the end of today's session for a couple of questions that have popped up in our Q&A. So I've got one here for you, Rob. And this one chats a little bit about, so we've sometimes had emergency changes in our hotfix or straight into production that we needed to deploy, where we wanted to make sure that the change gets back down to our lower environments. What's the best way to tackle that? Okay,
I mean, the kind of tongue-in-cheek answer is please don't put changes directly into production. But I understand that sometimes there are these emergency cases that are necessary. So I would say there's a few options there. So if we look first at the more sort of platform neutral way of doing things, even if you're doing like hot fixes or changes that are going straight into production, I think that adopting version control is still vital at this stage. And even, in some cases, if it is an emergency change, you may have to do that a little retrospectively. But by putting it into version control, you can then go to the setup for your lower environments, pull those changes from version control and apply them to your environments. And that is a reasonable working process, regardless of kind of how you're running your Salesforce DevOps. But on the other hand, again, putting my Gearset hat back on again, we do have a couple of features that will help with that. So we have a visual representation of your kind of entire environment and the flow through that in our pipelines feature. And the nice thing about pipelines is something called back propagation, which is a fancy way of doing exactly what I've just said. It's getting those changes back out of source control and migrating them back through your various sandbox environments. If you're not quite ready for pipelines, then you can always do a compare between environments. So rather than say, okay, compare my development sandbox against production, and see what I need to deploy to prod, you can actually flip that around and do it the other way around and say, what's new in production that I haven't got in my environments? And just use our compare and deploy feature to get those changes back where they need to be.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Rob. We have another question for you here in the Q&A from Vanessa. And Vanessa's asking, how do we prioritize the steps you've covered today so that we have a better idea of which order to tackle them in? Maybe you could chat a little bit about the steps that you think are most important when teams are starting to approach this.
Absolutely, yeah. So, one of the mindsets that we always try and sort of convey to folks is, walk before you can run. Okay, don't try and get a complete, full, automated, end-to-end, continuous integration pipeline if you're just getting started with this. Okay, so there are some steps that on both the technical and the non-technical side that are fundamental to everything. So starting with the non-technical, you'll hopefully have noticed a recurring theme in each of those points that I covered earlier, which is communication. Okay, communication and just having that awareness of what's coming up in the pipeline, what people on the team are working on. So, for example, if you have a team member that's making some changes to some automation related to the opportunity object, and you know that you've got to do some stuff on automation, talk to each other, collaborate, communicate, make sure that you're not going to be impacting and overwriting each other's changes. So I would say on the non-technical side, the biggest thing that you can do to set yourself up for success is to get that mindset of collaboration and working together and communicating together. Now, on the technical side, version control every day of the week. Version control unlocks so many of the technical things that you're likely to want to be able to do later. So rollbacks, that back propagation of those emergency changes we were just talking about, the ability to automate running the tests, the ability to automate moving things from environment to environment. So, for example, you could have a scenario where your automation will pull the changes from source control, apply them to an environment, run all of the tests. If all of those tests are successful, then it can move to deploying things up to the next environment. Advanced stuff, but it's all underpinned by getting started with using version control. So those are the two top tips that I think are most fundamental to that.
Excellent. Thanks, Rob. I think we've got time for one more quick question here. We've had a few questions today about sandboxes. And one popped up here is, during the sandbox preview window, how can I make sure deployments work when they're on different versions?
Oh, yes. This is always a tricky one. So there's a couple of things here. So earlier we talked about being quite strategic and deliberate about your sandbox refresh windows. And this is a factor that absolutely plays into it. It's not just when people need to use the sandbox, but also when that rare point, sort of 3 times a year when Salesforce do a new release, that we potentially have sandboxes running different API versions. So one will be on winter 24, one will be on spring 24, whatever that window looks like. So there's a few things that we can do around that, because nobody wants to be sitting there and unpicking a release. So one of the things that we try and encourage folks to do is, and this is something that is very easy to do within Gearset, but potentially it can, via other mechanisms, is pull metadata that has that highest common denominator. So for example, if you've, and we base this on API versions. So again, this is illustrative, but supposing we have an environment that's on API 53 and another that's on API 54, then actually I was right, it was lowest common version number. Basically, you would say, okay, I want you to treat this deployment as if they were both on 53. So don't include anything that is only applicable in version 54. Okay, so that's the technical aspect, and you can kind of say, okay, match the versions between these things. But also, this also comes back to the planning side of things. So plan what you're going to release and look through that and think, okay, is this a new feature that's introduced with the upcoming release? It's probably not going to be available to everyone anyway. But certainly by the time you get to production, until that release has gone generally available. But also, that planning around when we do those sandbox refreshes. So it's a tricky period, but there are ways that we can work around it.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Rob. Well, that is all we have time for today, folks. Thank you to all our lovely attendees for joining us. Big thank you to Rob for running today's session, and thank you also to Andy for answering all of your questions in the Q&A and chat today. We really hope you enjoyed today's session, guys, and we hope to see you soon on some more deployment webinars. So thanks so much, everyone, and take care.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.